Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the X's and Dogs podcast. I join you at 8:45 p.m. on Tuesday, January 27th, and I've spent a lot of the day refreshing my social media pages to try and stay up to date with the Browns head coaching search, because I think we all kind of expected today was going to be the day that we found out who the Browns head coach for the year 2026 and going forward is going to be. And up to this point, and it still, I think, could happen, you know, a lot of these coaching hires have been made late in the evenings, late at night when a lot of people are sleeping, 11 p.m., 12 a.m. at times. So to say that there's no chance that it could happen when I'm recording this podcast or shortly after the ending of this podcast would be rather inaccurate. And you're going to see me looking down at my phone here a couple times throughout the show today, just in case, you know, the news does break as I'm recording this podcast. You can do like a live reaction in that case. But anyway, I wanted to start the show by discussing kind of what has turned out to be a pretty touchy subject and a pretty testy time for Browns fans over the past 36 hours. Revolving around the interview of Nathan Scheelhaase. Well, I guess the whole situation started yesterday morning before the interview with Nathan Scheelhaase, when we got the news that Grant Udinski was removing himself from consideration, removing himself from the running of, for the Browns head coach position. So that happened yesterday morning, I believe around 8 or 9 a.m. Then, obviously the Browns team, the Browns organization leadership was out in LA, flew out to LA to interview Nathan Scheelhaase of the Los Angeles Rams. And by all accounts, it seemed to be a pretty good, lengthy interview over in Los Angeles. I heard from guys like Albert Breer, Mary Kay, I think, touched on it too, that there definitely weren't any negative comments being made about the interview. It seemed pretty positive coming from the Browns camp, and I think they seemed to be impressed with Scheelhaase during that interview, although we don't have a ton of information at this point. That's kind of the direction that we were pointed in. So that occurs all day yesterday. Then all of a sudden, we get the news that the Browns have left Los Angeles, departed from the Rams building, or wherever they were doing this interview with, Scheelhaase. Without, obviously, the signing of any contract or the agreement of any terms to become the Browns head coach. And at this moment, and I think it was yesterday evening, 6 or 7 p.m., the Browns Twitter world kind of went up in flames at that moment, into a panic on the realization that the Browns are more than likely, or at the time, were more than likely not going to hire Nathan Scheelhaase. I think that was kind of the common idea at that moment. And a lot of people just started to consider the reality that the Browns might be settling on Jim Schwartz, because the belief was that if it wasn't going to be Grant Udinski and it wasn't going to be Nathan Scheelhaase, then Jim Schwartz was going to be the guy. And everyone was giving their reactions to that. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I was right there with the rest of you yesterday evening on Twitter, kind of up in arms about the Browns process. And that's coming from myself, who just last week was very glass half full on the Browns head coach search whenever a lot of people had started to kind of sour on the process. I preached the idea that we should be patient with the Browns in this circumstance, and that, you know, the Browns were doing what they've always done, focused on data, focused on analytics, and, you know, moving forward from there. Well, to me, the Browns coaching search took a very sharp turn for the worse yesterday evening, when we found out that they were not going to hire Nathan Shieldhouse, who was moving into that Buffalo interview. Of course, now we know that the Bills decided to hire Joe Brady, so Shieldhouse is really, if it's not going to be a Cleveland head coach spot, you know, he's probably going back to LA, maybe becoming the offensive coordinator there, depending on what LaFleur decides to do, or if he's able to get a head coaching job. But once we found out that Shieldhouse was not going to be signed yesterday evening, I started to realize that, and the thought started to creep in my mind that Jimmy Haslam might have his fingerprints all over this coaching search. And that's what everyone talked about all day today on all the different Cleveland sports shows, all the different Cleveland sports radios. It was a very doom and gloom day here in Cleveland regarding the Browns, for sure. And, you know, we heard it all. That I heard takes that Jim Schwartz, you know, could be a viable option, could prove to be the correct option, you know, and then I obviously heard the takes that this Browns coaching search is a complete and utter mess, and we're going to be left with our last resort. So, where I stand currently at this moment on the Browns head coach search, and we still don't have an answer on it to this very second, but it really comes down to the result. Because, you know, I think in this case, you have to look at it from, and I've said this before, you have to look at it from the understanding that Jimmy Haslam has the potential and has the frequent history of meddling on decisions like the head coaching hire. So knowing that, you know, you have to look at the decision they make and think to yourself, was this truly an Andrew Berry process backed or data backed process that we all kind of believe that Andrew Berry would go about? Or was it Andrew Berry's throwing these names that his process kind of computes out and recognizes as good candidates, to where Jimmy Haslam shuts them all down because he is sold so heavily on the idea of keeping Jim Schwartz here in Cleveland. And, you know, if whether that be a defensive coordinator, whether that be a head coach, it seems Jimmy Haslam doesn't care. He just wants Jim Schwartz to be here in the Browns, or on the Browns organization. So what I mean by that in comparing those outcomes is that if Nathan Shieldhouse comes out as the Browns head coach, and we hear it over, you know, whether it be tonight, whether it be tomorrow morning, whether it be tomorrow night, etc., I believe we went through this whole process the way we were told it was going to be, in that Andrew Berry was leading the search, coming up with candidates who fit the mold that he created, you know, past all those whether they be written essays, you know, multiple choice questions. we heard all the reports about the questionable process that these candidates had to go through. But, you know, I think if Shieldhouse is the outcome, it makes that whole, you know, timeline, the last 3 weeks that we went through, kind of worth it, because to me it really is an Anderberry hire. And I'm not saying that will turn out to be, or it even is likely to be, a fantastic hire, but I think that outcome is clearly superior to the outcome of what the other option is, and that is Jim Schwartz being hired simply because Jimmy Haslam, you know, exercised his full power to veto the other guys and, you know, force Jim Schwartz, whether it be he forced Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator and Shieldhouse is not interested in that, Udinski is not interested in that, etc. The rest of the guys aren't interested in it. Whether it be that scenario or Haslam is just forcing the Browns to hire in making the executive decision that Jim Schwartz will be the next head coach. Either way, that outcome is significantly worse in my eyes. And I think a lot of you, over the last 24 hours, it has come to my attention that a lot of you Browns fans are pretty smart and that you agree with me on that. That the hiring of Jim Schwartz really is less about the negative outcome that Jim Schwartz might provide being the actual head coach, in that he might struggle and like lose games and our offense might not get better, but more so the negative outlook there stems from this idea that the Browns organization has truly regressed back to 2014, 2015, 2016, 2013, when Jimmy Haslam was just doing whatever the hell he wanted to, making whatever decision he wanted to. And to me, that is the scariest thing as a Browns fan to think about. And it's why this hiring cycle feels so important, even if the guy that they ultimately choose isn't successful here in Cleveland, because I think it represents what's going on behind the scenes in a way that we haven't really seen in years, because it was really hidden by the presence and the consistency of keeping Kevin Stefanski for 6 years, Andrew Berry for 6 years, and kind of just having that standard. I think it removed the potential ability to get a glimmer through the window in Berea, hypothetically, and seeing all the meddling that Jimmy Haslam may or may not be doing behind the scenes. So I think, again, this head coaching search represents that ability now to see what's going on inside of Berea. And I was someone, and I've been some. I haven't talked. This show has not gone on for long, but in the short time it has existed, I've talked a couple occasions already about how I think Jimmy Haslam has improved as an owner behind the scenes a little bit. I thought he doesn't get as much credit as he deserves in certain areas. You know, obviously he still has his very questionable decisions, and you can point to Deshaun Watson and this, that, and the other. And I would make the argument that most owners throughout the NFL would be willing to take the risk on a quarterback like Deshaun Watson at the time, and we can do the hindsight 2020 thing. But all that doesn't matter. All my arguments that Jimmy Haslam might have been getting a little bit better at his job being the Browns owner are completely wiped out, completely meaningless as soon as Jim Schwartz gets hired, in my opinion. Because it immediately, in the snap of a finger, takes us back to the harsh reality that our owner will simply make whatever decision he deems appropriate at any time. And we are still living in that world. It's why this head coaching search feels a little bit more important to me than, keeping the defense consistent or getting a little bit better offensively because we get a young, innovative mind. And both of those things could be really important, don't get me wrong. But I think they kind of fall short to the evaluation of Jimmy Haslam in the year of 2026. So that is where I am at with the overarching head coach search. I can go into details with why I think Scheelhaase is a better candidate than Jim Schwartz, and why in my opinion, and it really is only my opinion, none of us know at this point which one of these coaches would be the best option. But, why Scheelhaase could provide the better offense and why the improving the offense is more valuable to the team than keeping the defense consistent year to year. And I will have those conversations with you guys once we find out who becomes the head coach, and hopefully we find that out very soon. But in tonight's podcast, or I guess it'll come out to you guys probably very early in the morning tomorrow, I just wanted to focus on the themes, the deeper meaning behind this head coaching search, and why I've been very adamant and very open to, the way I view the outcomes of this head coach search. So that's all I'm going to say tonight on the Cleveland Browns head coaching search as a whole. Like I just said, I will 100% have content out to you very soon regarding who is exactly hired, what that means. To me, I'm going to try to view it as neutral as I can. If it's Schwartz, I'll give you positives and negatives. If it's Scheelhaase, I'm going to give you positive and negatives. That's going to be the way I go about this. I'm going to support the coach that gets hired here in Cleveland regardless, because it's my favorite team. It's the team I talk to you guys about. And I think that's my duty as a Browns fan, and I think that should be our duty as a community of Browns fans. So we will get answers very soon. I will be with you to talk about those answers very, very soon. Hopefully everyone can stay just a little bit more patient. Not that we have a choice in the matter, but for all of our own sanity, that is all I have for today's podcast. Hopefully you guys had a great day. Have a great night. I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.